The untold story of Cristiano Ronaldo's childhood. He almost wasn't born at all. Before Cristiano Ronaldo ever touched a football, before the goals, before the trophies, before he became the most followed human being on the planet, his own mother stood in a kitchen in Madeira and tried to end the pregnancy herself, using a homemade remedy passed down through generations of women too poor to see a doctor. It didn't work. A physician later refused to perform an abortion. And 9 months later, on February 5, 1985, the fourth child of a struggling, alcoholic father and an overworked mother was born in a hospital in Funchal. That child would go on to become a billionaire, a global icon, arguably the greatest footballer who ever lived. But almost none of it should have happened. And the story of how it did is far stranger, and far harder, than the highlight reels ever show you. Madeira isn't mainland Portugal. It's a volcanic island, hundreds of miles out in the Atlantic, closer to Africa than to Lisbon. In the 1980s, it was a place of fishermen, farmers, and families who made do with very little. Cristiano grew up in Santo Antonio, a working-class parish of Funchal, in a cramped home he shared with 3 older siblings, his brother Hugo and sisters Elma and Katia. His mother Dolores cooked and cleaned for other families to make ends meet. His father Jose worked as a municipal gardener and picked up extra shifts as the kit man for a tiny local football club called Andorinha. That club would change everything. His father's story is its own kind of tragedy. Jose had fought in Portugal's brutal colonial wars in Angola, and like a lot of men who came back from that conflict, he carried wounds nobody could see. He turned to alcohol. The household was loving in its own way, but it was also unstable, poor, crowded, and shadowed by his father's struggles. Cristiano was, by his own family's account, a stubborn and emotional kid. He cried easily enough that his own relatives nicknamed him Crybaby. He didn't take well to school. At one point he was expelled entirely, after throwing a chair at a teacher he felt had disrespected him. He wasn't interested in books. He was interested in exactly one thing. B-roll, kids playing street football with a worn-out ball, generic stock. A ball. Any ball. Rags tied together, a half-deflated plastic one, it didn't matter. He'd skip meals to keep playing. He'd sneak out of his bedroom window at night when he was supposed to be doing homework, just to get a few more minutes on the street with a ball at his feet. Most parents would call that a phase. For Cristiano, it was the only thing that ever made sense to him. By age 8 he was playing for Andorinha, the same tiny club where his father worked. 2 years there. Then a short stint with Nacional, one of Madeira's bigger clubs. And then, in 1997, at just 12 years old, something happened that should have been impossible for a poor kid from a remote island. Sporting Clube de Portugal, one of the 3 biggest clubs in the country, invited him for a trial. He had 3 days to prove himself in Lisbon, hundreds of miles from everything he knew. He passed. Sporting signed him for a fee that today sounds almost absurd, around £1,500. But for a 12-year-old, the number didn't matter. What mattered was what came next, leaving Madeira. Leaving his mother, his father, his brother, his sisters. Leaving the only island he'd ever known, to live in a youth academy in a city he'd never seen, surrounded by older boys who were faster, stronger, and far more polished than he was. He cried almost every night. He had a thick Madeiran accent that marked him instantly as an outsider, and the other kids mocked him for it. He was homesick in a way that's hard to overstate for a 12-year-old, no phone calls home whenever he wanted, no family dinners, no familiar streets. Most kids in that situation go home. Their parents pull them out. It happens constantly in academy football. Homesickness alone ends more careers than injuries ever will. Cristiano didn't go home. Instead, he did something that would define the rest of his life. He turned the loneliness into fuel. He trained harder than anyone else at the academy. First to arrive, last to leave, not as a slogan, but as a literal daily habit, even as a 12 and 13-year-old. By 14, he made a decision that terrified his mother. He wanted to drop out of school entirely and commit fully to football. With his mother's blessing and the support of his sporting tutor, he did. He never advanced beyond a basic level of formal schooling. Football was no longer a dream. It was the only plan. Then, at 15, his body almost took it all away from him. Doctors at Sporting's Academy discovered he had a serious heart condition, tachycardia, a racing heartbeat that, left untreated, could end his career before it had really started. It was serious enough that he needed surgery. Doctors used a laser to cauterize multiple irregular pathways in his heart into a single, stable one. For a teenager whose entire identity and future were built on athletic performance, hearing the word heart surgery must have been terrifying. He didn't have the luxury of a long recovery. He was discharged from the hospital within hours, and back in training within days. Most people would call that reckless. For Cristiano, stopping was never really an option. By 16, the academy's stubbornness had turned into something else entirely. An almost obsessive drive to be undeniable. Sporting's first-team coach noticed. He started training with the senior squad. And then, on August 12, 2003, fate handed him the one stage that mattered most. Sporting played a preseason friendly against Manchester United, in the very stadium built to showcase young Portuguese talent. United's manager, Sir Alex Ferguson, already one of the most successful coaches in football history, was in the stands. Cristiano was electric that day. Sporting beat United 3-1, and afterward, United's own players reportedly went to Ferguson and told him, "Sign this kid." Ferguson agreed. United paid roughly £12 million for him at the time, the most expensive teenager in English football history. The boy who once snuck out a bedroom window to play with a ragball was now the most expensive teenage footballer on earth. He asked for the number 28 shirt when he arrived at United. He didn't feel worthy yet of wearing the legendary number 7, previously worn by George Best and David Beckham. United gave him the 7 anyway. It would become the most famous number in football. Everything that followed, the Premier League titles, the Champions Leagues, the 5 Ballons d'Or, the billion-dollar brand, all of it traces back to a kid who refused to stop training through homesickness, through heart surgery, through a household shadowed by his father's struggles. The relentlessness people see in Ronaldo today, the obsessive gym routines, the refusal to ever appear satisfied, that's not a personality trait he developed as an adult superstar. That's a 12-year-old who cried himself to sleep in a city far from home and decided the only way through the pain was to outwork everyone else. It's easy to look at Cristiano Ronaldo now, the mansions, the private jets, the statue at the airport named after him, and assume he was always destined for this. He wasn't. He was a poor, stubborn, homesick kid from a volcanic island who very nearly wasn't born, very nearly went home in his first year away, and very nearly lost his career to his own heart before it had even begun. He didn't have a perfect path to greatness. He had a brutal one. And he refused to let it stop him. That's the part of the story most people never hear. If you want to see how this same kind of impossible beginning shaped his greatest rival, subscribe, because next we're telling the equally incredible, equally brutal story of how a small, sickly kid from Rosario, Argentina became Lionel Messi.